G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. On something like day 11 of my attempt to resuscitate 2 crook batteries, and I've just about finished rescue charging 4 batteries that were not too bad. People who've been following this series will be aware of it, but every video has to be a bit of a standalone effort in case somebody comes along who hasn't seen the ones that go before. So therefore there's a bit of an orientation introduction at the start of each one. As I said in yesterday's video, that solar panel on the left puts out about 1.1 amps and the one on the right only puts out about 1 amp. Sometimes it might be 1.15 versus 1.102 or something. It's about like that. Basically the panel on the left is not as old as the panel on the right. Working from left to right, I did have batteries C and D connected over here to the 1 amp panel. Whereas now I've got batteries E and F on the 1 amp panel. Batteries C and D are on the 1.125 amp panel, because battery E and F had 57 amp hours put into them over the 9 or 10 days. Battery C and D had only had 48 amp hours. And this morning, battery E and F were resting on 5.2 volts and 6.52 volts and 6.53 volts, giving us 13.15 volts. Battery C and D, which have had less current put into them, they were on 6.5 and 6.5 for 13 volts. So these ones, which have had 9 amps more, they're half a volt in front of these ones. Therefore I have changed the paneling on them. So that's what's happening there, as it were foretold within yesterday's prophecy. And meanwhile, dear old batteries A and B, after their third load test where they've had 195 amp hours go in, with a bit of the proverbial in out, meaning it had 22 amp hours come out, 23 amp hours go in, 14 amp hours came out, 27.82 went back in, and yesterday 10.83 amp hours came out, 13.98 went back in, and this morning was the third consecutive day when they were resting at 12.82 volts in the morning. And the previous 3 days I was using the inverter to power the hut, and I was sucking at about 14 amps. Today I have a different idea in mind, basically because I think the plaques of lead sulfate that are stuck on the plates that are giving me the shits, they've had a long time sitting there. They've got a very strong tenuous grip on the lead, and they haven't come off with anything gentle that I've done so far. So today I'm going to be a little bit less gentle. Although technically I really shouldn't pull any more than 22.5 amps out of them, which would be 10% of their rated capacity. What I'm going to try today is to pull 30 in short bursts and see if I can generate enough thermal shock across the plates to just push those pesky little lead sulfate plaques off the plates. For which purpose I propose to use my 310 watt Makita Jigsaw, which I actually bought 30.5 years ago when my son was a fetus, in order to cut the plywood to make the baby's cradle, and it still works. And of course, to be consistent, I should measure the specific gravity before we start, after discharge, and then after charging. And if you watched yesterday's video, then you already know how this procedure goes, so I'll save you the time and show you the figures when they're written down. Reading left to right from A, 1.265, 1.26, 1.26. B, left to right, 1.26, 1.26, 1.26. So maybe yesterday morning's readings were spurious. Yesterday's after discharge readings I can believe, yesterday's after charge readings I can believe, and I can believe these ones. Okay, so game plan is basically to cut slices of this while being in a position that I can watch what's going on amps and volts wise, and we see what we can see. Okay, so oops, helps if we connect the inverter to the battery. Okay, so now we have 240 volt power to the drill. Yeah, you can see that. That was 10 seconds and it was 12 amps with a starting current of 15. Goes up to 20. Okay, now let's cut some wood. $20 amps under full load. Okay, 4 minutes at 15 to 20 amps. Not bad. And I made a lot of firelighters. So now, turn the sawhorse around. And I'll try a slightly different angle of the dangle so that you can maybe get a better view of the needle. I don't know. How's that? Let's wind out the resistor. See, it is on full. tighten up my G-clean. There we go, made more firewood. Okay, well, seeing as the radiator pine picture framing wasn't really loading things up as much as I expected, let's see how we go with a piece of hardwood. This is either Tasmanian oak or Meranti. Not entirely sure which. Zoomificate in there again. Well, we got the 23 amps. There we go. If I push really hard, I can get it up to 25 amp drain. And we have more firewood. Okay, with a half an amp drain on it, it's brought itself back up to 12.6 volts. So time to go again. Okay. I wonder what 27 amps and 12.25 volts is. Turns out to be 330.75 watts. So 20 amps for 20 minutes. Probably pulled about 7.5 amp hours out of it. Kind of sort of thing, I think. So I'll leave that inverter on there for a bit while I go and collect the solar panel. And once I get the panel over here and ready to connect, then I'll switch off and I'll take a electrolyte reading, and then I'll hook it onto charge straight away. Okay, so on the one hand we have a bucket of fire lighters. On the other hand, even under half amp load, it's come back up to 12.65 volts. So I will switch that off and take a battery electrolyte reading. Okay, so now we're reading 12.68 volts, and all the specific gravities are now reading 1.260. So On the wild hypothesis side, that may mean, perhaps, hitting it with a 25 amp current drain did in fact provide sufficient thermal shock as to knock the lead sulfate plaques off the plates, expose more lead, and perhaps drive some of the hydrogen ions out of the lead sulfate plaques into the solution. That would be the wild hypothesis side. On the Occam's razor side, we could say that that's why you're not supposed to attempt to check the electrolyte closer than 1 hour from either discharging or charging, because you are going to get spurious readings. I think I'll go with the Occam's razor. But anyway, now I'll put the solar panel on it and see what happens then. Okay, 10 past 12, 12.72 volts. Bring the panel up to the sun. So I want 12.86 there. .4 amps. We'll see what happens. Quarter past 12, 13.51 volts, 9.7 amps. 20 past, 13.73 volts, 9.41 amps. 20 past 12, 13.87 volts, 9.66 amps. 12:30, 14.1415, 1617. Golly gosh, it's going up pretty quick there, eh? Golly gosh. Where are we? 9.66 amps. 14.4. Bloody hell. Well, I would have to say, going by the looks of that I probably only pulled about 3 or 4 amp hours out of it, allowing for the time between cuts. So my 7 amp hours was down to 3 amp hours. But yeah, it's very definitely saying that it's kind of had close to enough just now. So I guess I'd better detract the panel. 45 degrees. Another 10. Yeah, we would be 55 degrees out of the sun. And I have reduced the input current . .86 amps. 14.56. Yes, and I think I'm going to have to detrack it again. Unless the sun, that's more better. The sun's moving westwards across the sky and it's detracking itself. Come down to 5.23 amps. But the volts are still gradually climbing. So yeah, it thinks it's full. Okay, 14.5 at 20 to 1. It did reach up as high as 14.63 since the previous reading, but I held my nerve and left it there, and then the sun moved and detracked the panel. All the way down to 3.75 amps. Quarter to 1, 14.64 volts. It's climbing, isn't it? 4.7 amps is why. Tree shadows come away from the panel. 14 minutes to 1, and I'm going to detrack it again. There we go. .57, gee. 3.6 amps. It's definitely indicating that it's as full as it wants to get. Looks like I left you on there for 3 minutes. Sorry about that. 10 to 1, 14.57. .82 amps. 5 to 1, 14.49 volts, 3.29 amps. And it's dropping, kinda sorta. 1 o'clock, 14.63 or 14.64 volts, 4.48 amps because the tree branch has moved its shadow away from the panel again. 1, 14.61 volts, 4.12 amps. My supervisor has arrived. That's a cool. Yes, you can have that. .1, 14.58, 3.92 amps. 1:15, 14.55 volts, 3.83 amps. 1:20, 14.5 volts, 3.5 amps. As the system of automatic solar detracking does exactly what it's supposed to do. Gradually reduces the current going in, thus giving us a rat tail profile charge. 1:20, 14.46 volts, 3.35 amps. 1:30, 14.41 volts, 3.35 amps. 13.84 volts, 1.78 amps, because there's a cloud in front of the sun. And there has been a contrail up above the cloud too. In fact, it's entirely possible that the cloud has formed owing to the cooling due to the shadow of the contrail, because the cloud is about 20,000 feet vertically below the contrail. But it is a contraily sort of a day. You can see somebody going, I think that's the Brisbane to Sydney run. Sometimes they come right overhead. Other days they fly east of here, other days they fly west. And doesn't the voltage bounce back when the current comes back in? Going up through 14.19 at 3.23 amps. 25 to 2, 14.25 volts, 2.84 amps. 1:45 to 2, 14.23 volts, 2.66 amps. 10 to 2, 14.14 volts, 2.33 amps. 5 to 1, 14.08 volts, 2.3 amps. Kind of surprising, really, that the panel produces close to 25% of its rated output when it's actually at such a shallow angle to the sun. But that is what it does. Ain't that remarkable? 2 p.m, 13.94 volts, 1.8 amps. 13.77 at 5 past 2, 1.87 amps. 10 past 2, 13.69 volts, 1.43 amps. Quarter past 2, 13.64 volts, 1.42 amps. 20 past 2, 13.58, 1.17 amps. 25 past 2, 13.52, 0.53, 1.04 amps. 2:30, 13.51 volts, 0.87 of an amp. 25 to 3, 13.47, 0.77 of an amp. 20 to 3, 13.44 volts, 0.43 perhaps, 0.65 of an amp. 15 minutes to 3, 13.41 volts, 0.54 of an amp. 13.38 or 39 at 10 to 3, 0.54 of an amp. There's not much sunlight actually falling onto the face of the panel. Five to 3, 13.36, 0.55. Even though the sun has started to shine on the back side of the panel, so I'm figuring we're getting reflected sunlight off the pyramid. There you have it. Sun on the back of the solar panel. Pyramid power turning into electricities. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 13.35 volts, 0.54 of an amp. Pyramid power. Either that half an amp is coming from light that goes in through the back of the panel, or it's coming from light reflected from the side of the pyramid. Perhaps reflected from the other two solar panels, much in the same way that the white underside of the panel is reflecting and causing a bright spot behind it. So the pyramid reflects sunlight onto the solar panel. I didn't expect to notice that, instrumentality wise. I expected the voltage to continue to drop from 5 to 3 onwards, and at 3 o'clock I was planning on disconnecting the panel from the batteries. 5 past 3, 13.34, 0.47 of an amp, so the reflection of the pyramid power has commenced to diminish. Or on the other hand, that cloud up there might be interfering with the transmission of sunlight through the atmosphere. Either one would explain it. 10 past 3, 13.33 volts, that is. 0.52 of an amp. So clearly it was the cloud that was influencing things, not the sun going down. Quarter past 3, 13.32 amps, volts, 0.49 of an amp. There's now a shadow line that's taken out maybe a third of the full area of the back end of the panel, caused by the aluminium framing. So we've lost a third of the sunlight area on the back of the panel, and we've only gone from 0.54 of an amp down to 0.49 of an amp. Thus is the power of pyramids, reflecting the sunlight. Who would have thunk it? 20 past 3, 13.31 volts, 0.44 of an amp. 25 past 3, 13.31 volts. Clippy has come in to have a bit of a feed, 0.43 of an amp. I've got to go and get that kettle. Did you stay in frame, boss? Did you stay in frame? Oh, look at that. You pretty much did, didn't you? You're a good boy. Yes, you are. Look much better when you're not in the shade, don't you? See what's going on. .3 volts. .54 of an amp. Okay, so that's 3:30 in the afternoon. I've got to wait an hour after charging before I can play with the hydrometer and check the specific gravity. So what I'm going to do now is, well, yeah, I won't just flat out disconnect it. I will lay it flat. And then I'll disconnect it. 0.8 0.08 of an amp with the panel lying flat on the grass. So yeah, 40% of an amp worth of reflected sunlight, mostly coming off the side of the pyramid, apparently. 5 minutes after coming off charge, 13.24 volts. 10 minutes after coming off charge. Little Missy has come back. Ciao. Come on. Oh, well, you would have seen a bit of that. He's just being greedy. Her Joey's way too young for him to be interested in her. But anyway, that's a quarter of an hour after coming off charge. 4 p.m. Quarter of an hour off coming, half an hour after coming off charge, 13.08 volts. Okay, 3/4 of an hour after coming off the charge, 13.04 volts, 0.03 volts, 0.04 volts. If it does not drop any more than 0.07 from 13.04 in the next 15 minutes, then that may perhaps probably indicate that today's whole rigmarole was in fact worth doing. Because yesterday, 1 hour after coming off charge, it was showing 12.96 volts. And as you can appreciate, fair gap between 13.04 and 12.96. There's a gap of 0.08 of a volt. So if we drop by less than 0.07, then today was worth doing. If we drop by 0.08, then today was not worth doing. And if we drop by more than 0.08, then today was a counterproductive waste of time. On the bright side, I've been talking for a minute and a half, and it only went down by 0.04 of a volt in the 15 minutes between 4 o'clock and 4:15. So, ladies and gentles, alligators and reptiles, place your bets. Next time I talk to you, we will know whether I wasted my whole day today or not. What do you say, hey? Almost on cue. Princess of the Black Spot, would you like a bit of bread? That's a good. What about you, sissy? You want a bit of bread? How about you? Rastus, young fella, would you like a bit of bread? I was worried about you, haven't seen you since Friday morning. And you know it's not nice to disappear on Friday afternoon. Oh, well, I suppose you've been having a good time. Anyway, place your bets, ladies and gentlemen. Has Warbles wasted his time? What will the answer be? I'm going to call that 13.01 because that makes it 0.05 of a volt. Better than it was yesterday. And at that particular point, across 13 volts, 0.05 of a volt is worth 3% increase to the stored charge in the battery. So that's about, yesterday it was a 146 amp hour battery. 146 times 1.03 equals, today it's a 150.38 amp hour battery. So there you go. I did not waste my day. Not quite. And 150.38 divided by 225, which is what it's supposed to be, it's 66.8% of the storage capacity that I paid for. So yeah, it's still degraded 34%. At least that's what it looks like this afternoon at sundown. The real test will probably be tomorrow morning and see if it's holding anything better than 12.82 volts. Right, so now I'd better get on with looking at the specific gravities. After watching the kangaroos drinking, I guess. Isn't that cute? Mother and son. Damn. That was not supposed to happen. That was supposed to stay there. And guess who didn't lock up the friction nut quite tight enough? Sorry about that. But I had to go inside. Okay. Back to the actual busyness of the day. Okay, so that took 5 minutes. It's going down, but it's still better now than it was yesterday, 10 minutes ago. And basically taken 4 amp hours out of a battery in 20 minutes worth of little short, say 12 to 27 amp bursts. Doesn't seem to suck quite enough current out to be reflected by the specific gravities. And charging it, well, that cell there and that cell there, they both went from 1.260 to 1.265, which, because of the non-linear nature of the specific gravity on the charge state, means that those two cells have actually really only come up by about 1 or 2%. Whereas going on the voltage drop at 1 hour after charging, I was hoping for more like a 3% improvement. But anyway, time will tell, and we'll find out what's actually happened tomorrow morning. Just about time to go inside and light the fire. I've got to say, that is perhaps the most original way I've ever made firelighters in my life. 5 litres of it, electrically, with a jigsaw. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Who says I'm a mad scientist? And why do they want to know? Hey? Data, data, input, data, input, data. Ciao.